So this afternoon, I made a video exposing the lies that we're being fed regarding these driver standards, guidelines for overtaking, and what's going to be considered regarding cornering incidents. Sadly, when I uploaded it, there's issues with copyright. Despite using some of that material before, now it's being picked up as copyrighted material. So I'm going to have to redo that video and actually break it down into smaller parts because that was an hour long. So I do need to make it a bit shorter. Now, if you've not already seen it, earlier today I made a video regarding trying to promote another video which everybody needs to see. And it is this video here. Espinala 44 F1 News is the YouTube channel. And the video is called Sky Sports F1 are hypocrites. They enabled MV0's illegal driving in 2021, but now suddenly hate it. And all it is a 10-minute long video that every Formula One fan needs to see. It exposes so much in 10 minutes that really exposed the media narrative, the lies that we're being fed by media, and the fact that this sport is corrupt. And they do so in just 10 minutes. The problem with my videos is they go on for 40 minutes, an hour, hour and 20, and by the end of the video, a lot of the audience has dropped off. This gets so much into 10 minutes and it is a superb video. So if you've not already done so, please go and watch it. Okay, Espinala 44 F1 News, and please subscribe to their channel. Okay, please show their channel support. I already was subscribed to them, but I didn't get a notification from YouTube about the video. I only realised, well, I got sent a link to the video by somebody else that was in contact with me. So I've realised what the situation is. So once you're subscribed to them, click on that subscribe button, and where there's this bell, click where it says all. That bell turns black, and that should mean you get notified of when they upload a new video. Likewise, when I put out the videos about this ongoing we'll call it a controversy, it's a contrivance, you'll get to see each of the ones, because I need to break this down. There's so much about this that just exposes the FIA for exactly what they are. So please do that if you haven't already. Anyway, on to this video. The FIA, okay, and I'm going to be talking about the FIA and media. Now, the fundamentals of what we're talking about here are this notion of driver guidelines. Now, the FIA, the governing body of the sport, guidelines for overtaking, rules of engagement have existed for decades. Drivers competing in the sport, Formula One's not been a free-for-all, okay? There's always been standards by which the competitors have been judged upon, okay? The stewards have been able to make decisions to determine who was at fault for certain incidents, and they've been able to do that for decades. So it's not a new thing. It's not something that's unknown. It's not something that they're still trying to work out. They failed to apply those guidelines that have been developed over decades, and they failed to apply them to Max Verstappen in 2021. And subsequently, we're told that they've changed the guidelines. Now, if you look at the FIA's remit, and it's quite simply, this is the FIA International Sporting Code, and Martin Brundle at the Grand Prix at the weekend suggested that, oh, well, there's all these things and they conflict. They don't conflict in any way. Okay? They do not conflict in any way, because if everything is underpinned by this fundamental, it shows you that the FIA are clearly wrong. It's not about a conflict, it's about corruption. So Article 1 of their International Sporting Code quite simply states their role as the FIA. The FIA shall be the sole international sporting authority entitled to make and enforce regulations based on the fundamental principle of safety and sporting fairness. So, safety. The guidelines that relate to overtaking and who has the right to what at a corner of a motor racing circuit must relate to the fundamental principles of safety. And what they are suggesting, what has been given to us as explanation for what took place at the USA Grand Prix, was all they were considering was, who was the first car that got to the apex of a corner? A single arbitrary point on that track. Who got there first, and nothing else matters. Nobody within the FIA, and this is the governing body of a sport that has developed these rules, regulations, guidelines, principles over decades. At the point in time where somebody suggested that these now need to be amended, nobody could highlight the problem of what might be the problem with just that. Setting two vehicles off to race against each other to a specific point, converging on that specific point from different start points and converging on that at different angles, and all that's going to be judged is who gets there first. Well, what happens then? They've got there, then what happens? Well, they carry on, don't they? Because they don't just get there and stop. Them vehicles are travelling at high speed. A high speed because they're in competition with the other one to get there first. So they're both travelling at high speed. They're both converging on that point at different angles. And they continue beyond that point. And if those paths cross, what's going to happen? Well, that's going to be a massive accident, isn't it? So it's what goes on beyond that point. Well, what goes on beyond the apex of the corner? Well, that corner continues on. Funny that, isn't it? Continues on around a track. You know, that playing field on which this sport is contested on. And if no regard is given as to whether you can actually continue on that track after racing to that point, because you've got to that point by being out of control, then there's clearly a problem with those guidelines. Clearly a problem with those guidelines. But who have them guidelines been put in force to actually assist? The one guy who is willing to just throw everybody else out the way, ignore everybody else, ram themselves there with no regard for anything else, be willing to drive people off the track. And as long as he's the only person that's willing to do that, who else has done that? Who else? If these guidelines apparently kept, well, they weren't there in 2021. They've certainly now supposedly become that as of 2022. It's all about who gets to the apex first. Well, if all the other 19 drivers are still concerning themselves with, well, hang on a minute, I've got to do this in a safe manner, and I've still got to get around the track. Max thinks that doesn't apply. Max can just do what he wants. That doesn't make Max Verstappen a genius of the regulations or the driving guidelines, does it? It means that these guidelines have been specifically introduced to enable Max Verstappen to just chuck his car wherever he wants without consequence. What does that show you about the governing body of the sport? And I'm going to go into that in the other videos. I'm going to give better examples, and I'm going to give the examples using the footage, and I'll find a way of showing you. But the BBC, again, this is Espinala's video, is exposing the hypocrisy of the Sky Sports lies. But it's not just limited to Sky Sports. It's every form of media. Every form of media that reports on the sport of Formula One is all complying with the same narrative. Not a single one of them is saying, oh, there's a real problem here, and this problem represents corruption. This is Andrew Benson from the BBC, and this is a linked article which I'll come into, because this article stems from what is put out, is it today? 6 hours ago. Andrew Benson's question and answering session again. Woohoo! Andrew, the expert, will answer your question. Why has it taken so long to review the driver's guidelines? So, we come to the question. With the driver's guidelines being revised, why has it taken this long to review them, considering Verstappen's conduct in the 2021 season? The question is asked by Ollie. So Andrew Benson says this: the current guidelines came out of a request from the drivers for an improvement in policing of racing incidents. There was no problem with the guidelines. the problem with the policing. The guidelines already existed. The rules, the regulations, the driving standards, the rules of engagement, they already existed. The stewards, the FIA, weren't applying them to Max Verstappen. That's the problem, okay? But Andrew doesn't report that. Okay, they were aimed at trying to create greater consistency of application. They were consistently not applying them to Max Verstappen. They were not, Andrew says this, they were not specifically created in relation to Max Verstappen's driving. Well, what were they specifically created for then, Andrew? Prior to the 2021 season, what was the problem with the rules of engagement, with the driving standards? What happened in 2021, Andrew? Well, that would have all showed you in the video that I just got blocked on upload. But Andrew tells us all that they weren't specifically created in relation to Max Verstappen's driving. Approving such items is a long the process of approving it is what's taken since the start of the 2022 season, has it, Andrew? Really? Approving such items is a long process that passes through many levels of the FIA and requires final approval from the World Motorsport Council. So, at all of these approval levels, Andrew, nobody within that organisation and nobody at the World Motorsport Council is able to look at these guidelines and suggest that this notion of whoever arrives at the apex first is all that matters, okay? And they have the right then to dictate their line, even if that involves driving the other competitor off the track, even if that involves not staying on the track themselves. Nobody within the FIA or the World Motorsport Council can highlight that there's a problem there, and that what that then might create is two competitors driving without regard for staying on the track themselves, without regard for affording their fellow competitor track room, just going as fast as they can to the apex and not bothering about anything else. As long as you drive as fast as you can to the apex, it doesn't matter whether you stay on track, it doesn't matter whether you leave somebody else's track room. All it matters is you win the race to the apex. It doesn't matter whether you can make it around that corner of the racetrack. Then that's all that matters. Nobody in the sports governing body can highlight that as being a flaw of those guidelines. Funny that, isn't it? What does that say about the governing body? What does that say about the World Motorsport Council, Andrew? But Andrew's validating it. He's saying it's not specifically created in relation to Max's driving, and proving this takes time. That's right, Andrew. It takes time, doesn't it, Andrew? And for example, while the drivers and the FIA discussed amending the guidelines in Mexico City on Friday, the new draft will be available for the drivers to consider only at the Qatar Grand Prix in a month's time. So, what was the existing draft? What were the regulations prior to 2021? What changed after 2021? What did it change to? What was effective about that? What wasn't? What were the flaws within that? Why is there still a problem when that problem was highlighted in 2021? How did that new way of dealing with it deal with the problem? What is still going on? Are those regulations not being applied consistently? What did we see in America? Were they applied consistently, Andrew? No. It's still a problem with consistent application, isn't it, Andrew? It's worth mentioning that the current guidelines have not technically been formally approved by the driver. Not technically formally approved. Thanks for that, Andrew. In fact, the rules were shown to the drivers, but they said at the time that then rather than focus on the wording, they would prefer to focus on the people executing the rules. Yeah, so it's not about the wording, is it? Yeah, it's not about any doesn't mean all. It's about the people applying them being corrupt in their application. Oh, according to the wording, Max is the expert of these rules. Max is the genius. Is that right? That was because they felt the previous ones, which I'm going to click onto, okay, were fine, but were being applied in an inconsistent manner. So was it the existing guidelines? Was it the guidelines prior to 2021? Did the guidelines need changing for 2022? What were they then changed to? And are they still being applied regardless of what they are? Are they still not being applied properly to the one guy that always benefits from the application? Now, the situation is different. The drivers had a problem both with the guidelines themselves and their application. They feel the current rules leave a grey area that permitted the type of defence. Oh, so Andrew validates Verstappen by saying the grey area permits Verstappen to do what he does. Oh, it's the grey area in the new guidelines that permit Verstappen to do that. What is Andrew Benson doing? Validating Max Verstappen. Validating it. Fluffing Max Verstappen. Okay? A grey area, permitting the type of defence Verstappen employed against Lando Norris in Austin. Hence, the meeting in Mexico that led to a request for the guidelines to be amended. So, what we're saying is, well, we're not saying this, but what happened is in America, Max Verstappen was in fourth position and he was trying to overtake Lando Norris for third. And Andrew Benson's description of that is, once again, Israel is defending itself. Max Verstappen is defending himself here, right, by attacking for third, right? And the grey area allowed him to do that. Thanks, Andrew. Right. Are the driving standards in F1? I'm not going to go into that. What I'm going to go into is this article that relates back to, where is it? It's the previous ones. So when you click on the previous ones here, it links back to the 20th of March 2022. Okay, start of the 2022 Formula One season. Formula One drivers given new driving standards ahead of season start. So we identified a problem with the 2021 season, didn't we? And that was that Max Verstappen ran Lewis Hamilton off the road at Imola, at Monza, Spain. He was guilty of crowding him on the track. He ran him off the road at Brazil. He ran him off the road at Saudi. He ran him off the road at Abu Dhabi. There's a problem. How many penalties did Max Verstappen get? There's a problem, isn't there? So we're going to give new driving standards for the start of the 2022 season, and we're still talking about it. Several seasons later, the same guy still being allowed to drive that way. Well, he didn't need to drive that way in 2022 and 2023. Why is that? Oh, because his car was a rocket ship, and all he needed to do didn't even need the aid of DRS. Oh, because Adrian Newey's genius made that car so aerodynamically efficient, apparently, that all he needs to do is get somewhere behind the car, put his foot on the pedal, and halfway down the straight, Max's car was 20 metres ahead of the other one. And by the time they've reached the braking zone, Max Verstappen was 2 seconds ahead of the car he'd just overtaken. So we didn't need late lunges back in 2022 and 2023. The moment that Max doesn't have that car, then Max does this. Max has to put his car in a situation, throw his car into a situation where it's a case of, if you don't get out of the way, we crash. Did it in 2021, and he's doing it in 2024. What's changed? What's changed? The only thing that's changed is Max isn't driving a rocket ship that is so far ahead of the field now. That's the only thing that has changed. Nothing else. They told us in 2022 and 2023 that, Max is matured now. Oh, that's really calmed him down. Gifting his world championship has really calmed him down. He's matured now. No, it hasn't. He just didn't have to do that because the car just blitzed past everything. So back in 22, Andrew wrote, because he was fluffing back then, he's never told the truth about the 2021 Abu Dhabi fix. Back in 2022, he was writing, Formula One drivers have been given new driving standard guidelines before the 2022 season. The move is part of a series of changes governing body, the FIA, has made to try to learn the lessons from the mistakes made last year. Oh, so 2021 was all mistakes. the guidelines that had been developed over decades. They made a mistake by not applying them every time they didn't apply them to Max Verstappen. That was just a mistake, was it, Andrew? That was a mistake that the FIA didn't penalise Max Verstappen in Imola. They didn't penalise him in Monza at the first time he did it at the chicane. They didn't penalise him in Spain. They didn't penalise him in Brazil. They didn't penalise him for what he did properly at Saudi. They didn't penalise him with a penalty for Abu Dhabi. Oh, that was just a mistake, wasn't it? Right. The new guidelines outline the ways in which driver overtaking and being overtaken must behave while fighting, because that never existed before, did it, Andrew? The new ones do that. The onus is on drivers to take responsibility for matters such as gaining advantages by leaving the track. Oh, so that was never the onus on the drivers to not take responsibility by gaining an advantage by leaving the track. So Andrew presents this as being something new. As a result of 2021, we've decided that drivers are not allowed to gain an advantage by going off the track. Oh, thanks for that, Andrew. Race 1 of 2021, Max Verstappen performed an overtake of Lewis Hamilton by going off the track and was made to give that place back because he gained an advantage by going off the track. The rest of the 2021 season, they enabled him to gain an advantage, not be overtaken by forcing the other car off the track or going off the track himself. Where's the inconsistency? So you're saying this is a problem with the guidelines, are you, Andrew? Okay. This is a significant shift away from the manner in which former FIA race director Michael Massey personally intervened to tell drivers who had gone off track and gained position to return it, and is likely to lead to more penalties. Why weren't them penalties given in 2021, Andrew? Talk us through them. Look at the difference between the truth and how Andrew Benson talks about things. This is a journalist. This is somebody who works for the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. We have British drivers in the sport. We have a British man who was denied officially being the 8-time world champion in the 2021 season. We're now in the beginning of the 2022 season. He's never exposed the egregious nature of what took place. He's called it controversial. But say, oh, it's all changing now. Not exposing the blatant corruption that took place in 2021. Who are you representing, Andrew? Racing ethics became a major issue throughout 2021, especially in the context of Max Verstappen's aggressive racing tactics. Aggressive again. Aggressive, that's the best we can describe them as, isn't it? The new rules lay out guidelines for manoeuvres where cars are overtaking both on the inside and the outside. So the new rules, do they? So they didn't exist, no? They did. The guidelines have not been published beyond the teams, but they have been seen by BBC Sport. Again, why aren't we able to see them? Why are they not published to the world? To anybody seeking to compete in the sport at all levels of the sport? Because in any sport, and the FIA are the governing body for all forms of motorsport, right? If there is a change to the guidelines or the rules or the regulations for football, for rugby, oh, we just told the teams what them changes are. We're not telling anybody else. Would that be fair? That from FIFA, from the RFU, from the ICC, if it's cricket, from whatever sport that's like being contested globally, would be that governing body, the global governing body for the sport, say, oh yeah, we're going to make some changes. We're going to introduce some new guidelines for certain things that take place within this sport, but we're not telling you what they are. We're only going to tell the teams. What's that all about? Overtaking on the inside. The new guidelines dictate that a driver being overtaken, oh, they're new, are they? New guidelines that didn't exist beforehand. New guidelines dictate that the driver being overtaken must give sufficient room to an overtaking car if a significant proportion is alongside. And look at what we're using. We're using ambiguous terminology, okay, that he's quoting. The overtaking manoeuvre must be done in a safe and controlled manner, whilst enabling the car to remain within the limits of the track. Yeah, yeah, funny that, isn't it? Yeah, funny that. So you've got to do it in a safe and controlled manner, remain within the limits of the track, and you've got to respect the other vehicle. Right? Yeah. Sufficient room to the overtaking car, which means everybody's got to leave sufficient room for each other. It doesn't mean that it can be interpreted due to a grey area that actually you don't have to. If you're one car but not the other, it means you don't have to give the other car room, or you don't have to stay in the realms of the track. Oh, that's a grey area because it doesn't say that you have to. It's not a grey area, and it doesn't mean that you don't have to. It's common sense that you have to. Why are stewards not applying common sense? Why are stewards going, oh, actually, according to these guidelines, they say that Max can just throw his car into a corner and drive the other car off track because he's not the one that has to stay on track going around there. He doesn't have to care about what happens to the other car. He can go off track. It's just the other car that is responsible for staying on track. What is that all about? What is that all about? Overtaking on the outside. You know, again, we've got this in bold. This is back in 2022, and they're trying to say that Lando Norris was the car overtaking on the outside, despite going into that corner. Lando was the car that was ahead. The same rules apply for overtaking on the outside. The FIA says that the requirement for a driver being overtaken must give sufficient room becomes active when a significant portion. Ambiguous language. Ambiguous language. When previously, I'm pretty sure, again, due to this document that none of us see, but was explained to us, those of us that watch the sport, it was explained to us by the likes of Brundle that if you're overtaking on the inside, trying to put a move up somebody up the inside of a corner, by the time you reach the braking zone for that corner, the point in time where you are determining how much you have got to slow your car by to enable yourself to get around that corner, at that point in time, if you're trying to put a move up the inside, you have to be at least halfway alongside the car that you're attacking in order to be entitled to room at that corner. If you're not, it's your responsibility to back out of that attempt. At that moment in time, you make the assessment and you've got the time then in order to apply the sufficient braking force, and that is going to determine your line around the corner. The car on the outside can see what he needs to do, and the car on the inside can see what they need to do, and each respectively apply the correct braking force. And that means either you're entitled to track room as the inside car, meaning the car on the outside has to make sure they pick a line that gives you the space on the inside of that corner, means that they can't go flat out around the corner and go for the racing line and try and clip the apex themselves. It means that they've got to brake harder to take a wider line. It means the car on the inside is entitled to track room around the corner and can brake accordingly to challenge around the corner, but sufficiently so that they afford room on their outside on exit of the corner. So they pick a line around the corner that affords both cars the room to make it through the corner and adjust their speed accordingly. That's going to enable to do that. Control. Okay, that is what we knew. Now we're using ambiguous language. Who in the FIA thinks that ambiguous language, which could be interpreted as a grey area? Oh, who decides what constitutes sufficient? Who decides what constitutes a significant proportion? Shall we open it up to an argument between Christian Horner and Jonathan Wheatley versus Toto Wolff and some other twat from Mercedes? You know, that's not what it's about, is it? It's about having clear parameters which existed and assessing what is going on in accordance with those parameters. Braking zone for the corner. We can clearly tell from the telemetry, this is where the cars brake for this corner. So at this moment in time, what is the location of the two cars we are considering relative to one another? Who is entitled to be left room around this corner? Who is entitled to which line around this corner? Is the lead car entitled to just take the racing line around the corner, or is the challenging car entitled to be left room? Okay, from that point in time, does each car leave each other correct amount of room around the corner if there's an incident? And therefore deal with any infringement on that basis. Around the outside of a corner, I believe you had to be on the outside level with the car you were attempting to overtake, not just halfway alongside it, because going around the outside, you've got to travel further. So rather the inside line, which is a shorter route, going around the outside, you've got to travel further, so you had to be at least level with the car you were trying to compete with. We're now using language which says a significant proportion. Well, again, why are we using language which is open for debate, a grey area? Why have we introduced that into a guideline? Who is introducing that into a guideline? And for what purpose? What does it enable? Well, what it does, it enables the FIA, the governing body, for its stewards to make decisions to favour the driver that conducts themselves in that way. And there's only one driver willing to conduct himself in that way. And that driver is Max Verstappen. Who have these rules been developed for? Oh, they are the Max Verstappen rules, aren't they? They're the Max Verstappen rules. The whole sport is a contrivance. Okay? It's all set up to facilitate Max Verstappen. When you've got 19 guys that are willing to contest a Grand Prix and all have respect for each other, and one guy that's just throwing his car at you, and if you don't get out of the way, he'll crash into you. And then the way that the stewards deal with incidents like that, well, yeah, Max is actually the expert of these guidelines. Max is the genius that understands these guidelines, and actually it's you that's got it wrong and Max is right. That's what they're setting up, aren't they? And Andrew Benson here from the BBC is writing articles that validate all of that. And that's essentially all that's going on here. You've got a corrupt sport, a corrupt governing body of the sport, and corrupt journalists making out that that's all okay. And that's the dynamics of Formula One. Has been throughout the 2021 season and ever since. And this is why I exist as a YouTube channel. This is why the likes of Espinala44 exist. This is why NS&C exists. This is why FF1 exists. Boytendio is a bit something else, okay? He's slightly different, but he will call out the truth as well. But this is why we're doing what we're doing. This is why you're here. This is why you know that something needs to be done. And nothing will be done leaving it for them to do it, leaving it for the FIA to police themselves. They won't. They are corrupt. This is the government, okay? This is the governing body in charge of solving problems, of regulating the sport. They're not applying those regulations. They've changed what was a working system, guidelines, driving standards that have been developed over decades. They pretend that nobody now knows them. They've amended those regulations. They've amended those driving standards and guidelines to enable the driver that's driving dangerously. And this is the governing body of a sport, responsible for safety within that sport, amending guidelines for driving standards which are integral to safety to enable the driver that is driving in an unsafe manner. Now that is essential. That's exactly what they're doing, and yet no media is calling it out. Instead, the media are talking about it in the opposite manner, going, actually, this driver that's driving in this way, which is dangerous, is actually the genius here. He's the genius. This is what we're dealing with. I'm going to wrap this video up here, and I'm going to then work on evidencing what was policed in 2021, what has taken place since, and what they're now doing, and how they are lying to us all, and how this official governing body is actually conducting itself. They're not acting as the government of a sport, are they? They're not governing the sport. What that government is doing is facilitating the ambitions of specific parties. That's corrupt. They are facilitating Red Bull to increase the chance of Red Bull and Max Verstappen's success. That is all feeding in to the overall narrative and the show that is being given to us, that is owned by Liberty Media, where Liberty Media are making the money out of it. So the governing body, the government, is serving the corruption of Red Bull and Liberty Media, and that axis is controlling what goes on in the sport, not the governing body of the sport. That's corruption. That's a crime. They're selling it as a sport, and it's not a sport when that is going on. That is entire corruption. It's a fraud. What took place at Abu Dhabi was a fraud, and the media was lying to us about what was actually going on and the fraudulent nature of it before it even took place. So I'll soon be getting back onto Abu Dhabi, but whilst this is a hot topic, we're going to obliterate it. We're going to show them for exactly what they are. So, again, if you've not done it, get yourself across to Espinala 44 and watch their 10-minute video. 10 minutes of your time to watch this video. And get yourself subscribed to Espinala 44. And like I say, hit the notification bells, both on here and over there. And you'll get notified of when I next upload something, which will have some footage of some Grand Prix to show you exactly what offences took place back in 2021 and what penalties were handed out, and what offences took place and what penalties weren't handed out. Once again, and as always, thank you for your time.